The map of GTA 5 is huge, but have you ever wondered just how many people could live on it? Well, if the answer is yes, great video choice. Estimating the population of a map so huge does come with some challenges, so we will begin small and work our way up to the city. Grapeseed is a nice and easy place to start. It's by far the smallest and most insignificant town in the entire game, and apparently has the slogan, the industrial heart of the LMOC. Of course, the town with a whopping one factory is the industrial heart of anything. Well, technically, if you want to be precise, that is true, seeing as the neighboring Sandy Shores does not in fact have a factory. But we're not here to count factories, but to determine population. Now, for this town, that shouldn't be that hard, right? I just have to count the houses, look up how many people on average live in a house in California, then multiply the two, and come to the total population. The thing is, no. Because there's one problem with this way of counting, and that is the houses. For example, is this a house? I'd say yes. This one's a small crappy trailer. Still consider it a house. But what is this? Well, it's clearly not a house, but you might be able to live in it. Well, in the end, for everything I had to make rulings. And if the back of your building's windows look like this, or your building in general just looks unlivable, there's probably nobody living in it. Generally, that means your population is going to vary depending on who's counting. For Grapeseed, this is the area I considered the town. I know, pretty big. And this is every house on it I found. In total, that makes for 19 houses, which means a population of about 55 people. How pathetic. And if we go to the more demographic side of this, I would say they're mostly hillbilly farmers. On to probably the most depressing city in the entire game, Sandy Shores. This failed tourist town, full of sand and sadness, is very lightly populated, cause what might at first glance look like a fairly well stitched together town is mostly filled with either home trailers, poorly maintained houses or straight up crack shacks. It is therefore no wonder that there are only 58 of them. That is even including this more open desert bit. Which means Sandy Shores should have about 169 people in it. Nice. And for the types of people living there, I'd go with the increasingly popular hillbilly crackhead variety.
And you got something to be doing, like calling a therapist.
What next? Ah, finally! A sort of civilized town. Paleto Bay is of course famous for its questionably well-defended bank, and for generally not sucking ass. And whilst the map might make this town look by far the biggest, looks can be deceiving, because if we strip away the industry and the businesses, you are left with very few actual houses or apartments. 45 of them to be precise. And that's mostly only because of this tiny apartment complex. That makes for a total population of around 131. And yes, that's less than Sandy Shores, but it is about the same if we look around the actual town part of town. And if we consider that Paleto Bay is not filled with small rusty chum buckets that are about to fall apart, the town would definitely have a higher population in the real world. Also, there's just no way in the world that I'm putting Sandy Shores above Paleto Bay. Speaking about the population, those are starting to become a bit more normal. Although, is that an upscale Oompa Loompa? And now we have arrived at the big boy city itself, Los Santos. Luckily, the start is easy enough. I can stripe off the port and airport immediately. Also, the industrial area is completely void of actual housing. Then there are the casino and some other buildings up here. And suddenly, the situation looks a bit more manageable. The next easiest developments to count are the single-family homes. They're easy to pick out from above. And there are some large concentrations of them, mainly in Richmond and South Los Santos. At least that was supposed to be easy, but even the easiest neighborhoods already had some buildings that needed to be manually checked. Let me introduce myself, Inspector Fugly from the LAPD. Hello, I need to see your house. Yes, this is indeed a house. And as one could probably anticipate, Richmond didn't end up having that many people in it. And overall it was pretty doable. But it was in South Los Santos where I ran into my first real sign of things to come. These kinds of apartment buildings all required at least a service level inspection. But at least these still had numbers on the front doors. So overall South Los Santos was still pretty doable. But as the population of the neighborhoods kept increasing, my trouble kept up. But I managed to work my way through Vespucci all the way up to Little Seoul. Cause there I arrived at this. Yes, that's one solid boy. I found counting those mega flats quite difficult, so I did whatever I always do when encountering a difficult task in my life. I pulled out my thumb and went, yes, that's probably right, and made a well-educated guess. But whilst strolling through Skyscraper Lane, my keen eye did notice something else. Hey wait, why does this house have so many computer screens? I had discovered what office buildings look like, which saved me quite a lot of work in Little Seoul, but still bringing us to the largest amount of housing units yet. And then it was time for the part of the city I'd been purposefully delaying for as long as I possibly could. Hell. Also known as downtown Los Angeles. Thank God most of it was actually office buildings. Still there were a whole lot of buildings like this. Ooh, ow, this hurts poor old Fugly's brain. Which shows in the numbers, cause looks like we've got a new record, boys. Now there's just one more belt, which I'll split into two. This part had a lot of hotels and businesses. This bigger part, not so much. But after applying a bit of elbow grease, I got them counted eventually. There they are. Here's Rich Douchebag Part 1. And here is part 2. That means it's time for the totals. There should be a total of 6,144 permanently livable housing units in Los Angeles, which translates into a population of 17,586. Basically equivalent to a good-sized arena. But since I did not count things like the homeless, and also generally guessed on the low end for apartments, let's say the city should realistically be in the range of 17,500 to 19,000 permanent inhabitants. And if we then zoom out to the whole island, there should be around 6,300 houses in total, translating to about 18 to 20,000 permanent residents that can live there. And now that might not sound like much, but believe me, it's pretty gigantic, especially considering the level of detail on the map, and that we're talking about a game originally released in 2013. Excuse me, what the fuck? That's almost 10 years ago. How in the world is that possible? Anyway, now over to some interesting things I discovered whilst combing through the map. The one thing I really never noticed before is that there's an extremely large amount of hotels. Like crazy many. These are all the ones I found when I just went flying over the city again for 15 minutes with the knowledge I got now. And they're big too. They're mostly concentrated in these regions near the coast and near Vinewood, but I would say that if you counted total realistic population instead of permanent population, you'd have at least a 15% higher result. It's also very interesting that there's so many people living in the city. Sure, at a glance everyone can say that by far the most people live in the city, but maybe not that 96% of them would live there. Meaning that in my opinion, the developers have done a very good job of making the map feel relatively balanced. And let me stress, these figures are not absolute. Take Fugly's home for example. A very nice home indeed. But if you look through the windows at night, that's right, it's offices. But looking past all the house placement that doesn't make sense, or ignoring the office buildings disguised as apartments, and apartments disguised as offices, or at least I think this is housing, more so looks like the fucking back rooms in there, I do think the total should be relatively accurate. So if anybody is interested, here's the note sheet with which I counted all of the housing. The method I used was just going from neighborhood to neighborhood, or sometimes just even from part of an apartment building to another part, and constantly updating the numbers until I got that sheet. And these are in corresponding order the node maps I made to track my progress. I hope you found this video entertaining, or at least somewhat interesting. If you did, feel free to stick around the channel and hopefully see you next week. Bye bye.